Now, before we dive into that, you're probably wondering at what point do we address some of these color issues? Do we do it after our localized dodging and burning, or do we do it before? And, to be honest, it really doesn't make a huge difference. It's whatever is more convenient for you. But I tend to just do it at the beginning so I can kind of get it out of the way and then fine-tune whatever's left over with my sort of main local fixer dodge and burn sort of grouping. The really important thing is you just have the strategy to identify those areas that need to be locally corrected. Because if we look at something like this under the eye, if I try to address this just using my normal sort of dodge and burn stack grouping that I have for my fixer, then, it's going to be very hard to just work on that particular area. All the adjustments I need to make, then I'm going to have to sort of mask them out. I can't really clip them separately because then it's going to affect, all the areas that I've dodged or burned. And I tend to want to just kind of fine-tune certain things. So areas like the lips, the eyes, shadows like this, or if we have particular patches of color shift, I tend to just have a separate group for that, sort it out, and then whatever's left over, those sort of minor luminosity shifts, that's what we deal with in that fixer grouping. So something like this we're going to deal with on an individual basis. And so the way I do that basically is just to, let's go ahead and group actually our previous one here. So we're going to just call this, let's just call this lip corner or something like that. So that's one lip corner, there we go. And then we're going to grab another group here, and we're going to call this our eye shadow, even though it's not your traditional eye shadow. It's a shadow under the eye in this case, caused by our light, but you know what I mean. So then we're going to grab our luminosity helper, and what I want to basically do is just, the first thing I want to fix here, because there is a luminosity issue, I want to fix the luminosity issue, because everything will sort of play off of that. I don't know what color I need to correct yet until I correct the luminosity shift. So here we didn't really have a luminosity shift, it was purely color, and we could tell that through our little sort of helper layer here. But in this case, we can see with our luminosity helper that, there's definitely a shadow there. So let's address that first. So I know I'm going to need a curves adjustment here, so let's just grab a curve, and we're going to crank this curve like way up, because, there's a lot of shadow there that we want to actually sort out. So really sort of aggressive curve, something like this, and then like that. All right, and then let's just invert that, because obviously we don't want to have everything masked in. And then in this case, I'm going to paint with a 1% flow, simply because that is such an aggressive curve. Remember, I mentioned in previous ones that generally your flow rate is sort of, inversely proportional to the steepness of that curve. So if you've got a curve that's pulled way up or down, lower down your flow rate so that you still have a lot more control. Now, if you find that you're still getting too much in the flow rate, then of course you can adjust the opacity down as well. But I think 1% flow is going to work fine for us here. So I'm basically just going to start to kind of work on this area to create a mask for myself and just, in a nutshell, remove it. So let's just kind of gradually paint here until that shadow is all but gone. It doesn't have to be gone completely because, naturally there would be a bit of a shadow there, but more than anything, you just kind of want to get rid of it so it's not as noticeable. And, this is not an area where you want to lasso tool it in, because there's sort of gradation as it goes out towards the tip and everything. So, it's just easier to create the curve and then just mask it in for ourselves just by painting. So that's, I think, a pretty good start. Probably fine tune that a little bit more, but I think, it's getting there. Almost done here. All right. And then let's just zoom out a little bit too, just to make sure that it's looking good at that level. And I think that's not too bad. So if this was a black and white image, we would be done. And that's one lovely thing about black and whites, is that you don't have to worry about color. But basically, that's kind of what we've gotten rid of, and we can probably just get rid of a little bit more of the shadow in this area. So always good to toggle on and off and see how you're doing. All right, there we are. Okay, so luminosity-wise, we're good. We fixed kind of the main problem that's there. Now there's shadowing here and everything that we could fix, but that would be a separate adjustment. And that's kind of one thing that you always have to factor in is, where do I stop? And generally, here the skin color is very different than it is on the, on the actual facial area. So, any adjustment we do here will probably differ from what we need to do here. So I would say just, work on this area first, and then if we need to address something here, that would be, again, a separate set of adjustments. So obviously we can see that things are pretty screwed up here. I mean, we've got a super saturated patch here, which we have to deal with. So just kind of toggling that on and off. We're making progress, but definitely there's still work that needs to be done. So the next thing we want to do is, I guess let's try a hue saturation adjustment, because we obviously have a saturation issue here. Now, one thing that you'll notice is if I go into luminosity, things are looking a lot better, right? We're not kind of making that adjustment in saturation. It's just sort of lowering the luminosity. And you know what? Actually doesn't look too bad. If we go into our color, we can see that, it's pretty close. But we're going to do this the difficult way. So this is something that's always worth trying, because sometimes it just does the trick. Like if you change it to luminosity and it looks good, then you're done. You don't have to worry about anything else. But there's some situations where that won't help, and you actually do need to manually adjust it. So that's why, in this case, I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, one thing to always keep in mind too is that if you were to change it to luminosity blend mode and try and clip a hue saturation adjustment to this, the effect is, it's not really going to be what you expect it to be. As you can see, I'm kind of playing with the actual saturation. Really what we're doing is we're making a mild change to luminosity, and that's really all it is. So because obviously this is just doing luminosity, it's ignoring color, so any color adjustment that we're doing via the saturation slider, it's not showing up. So if you try and clip any color adjustments to a luminosity blended curve, not going to show up. So that's one thing to always keep in mind, because I've had that before where I'm trying to adjust the saturation and it's not doing anything, and I realize that I'm in luminosity blend mode. So definitely keep that in mind. So let's go back to our regular normal mode here, and let's go ahead and fix some of this stuff manually. So again, hue saturation, and we're going to clip that down. So holding down Option or Alt, just hover in between and clip it. And then again, we can go into reds if we want. Just sample our red color here, and then start desaturating until we're happy. So something probably like that, I think, would be good. Now, again, see, we're sort of fixing the issue in this area, and it's looking good. But as we pull down, like right here is where this area looks good, but this is still too saturated. So as you can see, we're going to have to do a little bit of masking here. So let's just get our under eye, like this really bad part here that we were, struggling with. Let's get that perfect. So that's at all the way at minus 52. And then we're going to mask out the areas that we shouldn't necessarily adjust by so much, because obviously this area now is way undersaturated compared to everything else. And let's see if our color reveals that. Yeah, we can see, that this patch is just not what it should be. So let's go ahead and grab a black brush, and I'm going to paint at 2%. And then let's just kind of get rid of this area here. So we're not obviously going to paint it fully black. We just want to kind of reduce the amount of desaturation that's happening in that area. All right, I think that's getting pretty close. Yeah, getting closer. Now, I still think that, let's just zoom in a little bit. I still think that there's a little color issue going on here, particularly, I think, in this area here. So maybe we want to address something there. Now, I don't think I've necessarily masked in all of that. Let's just see here. No, our mask is primarily constrained to this area here. So if I want to fix this little patch over here, and let's see if our color reveals that, there's a little bit, right? We can kind of notice that there's something going wrong here. It's not quite perfect, but, it might be acceptable. Well, let's try and make it perfect, though. So I'm pretty happy with that hue saturation masking. Let's just go ahead and see what we've done there. So you can see we've taken it out of certain areas, and toggling on and off, that's what our hue saturation adjustment is doing. All right, so next thing we're going to do is try and fix this little patch here. And so if you were to do that, basically let's just go ahead and just lasso this in. I think maybe something like that. This area just feels a little bit off to me. And maybe even a little bit here. Let's grab that. Q again for the quick mask, blur, Gaussian blur. That should be enough. So Q again. And then what I'm actually going to use for this is selective color. And I like selective color because it easily allows me to distribute the color based on kind of intuitively what I think is going on here. So I'm going to go into either reds or yellows, because that's where skin tone tends to live. Unless, of course, you've got like crazy gels lighting your image, then you have to adjust accordingly. But for a normally lit, properly white balanced image, should be in around the yellow or red. So let's see, what can we do here? Okay, well, immediately I noticed that, if I slide the yellow up, that's looking better. I mean, look at this area here. It feels kind of bluish, kind of magenta. So we can see that this way we're kind of working against ourselves. So at 0, looking kind of bluish. So let's try to slide this up, and that's probably a lot better there. And then with magenta, let's try and take away maybe a little bit of magenta. So like something like -2. And sometimes it's easier just to type that in. And let's see if we want to do anything with cyan. So obviously we don't want to add cyan because it's going to make things look pretty incorrect. And then if we start taking away cyan, essentially what we're doing is we're adding red. And so adding a little bit of red there, I think actually looks not too bad. Not too much, though. I would say, something like that. It's predominantly this yellow that we're really after. So I'm actually going to nudge yellow up a little bit. And you can also play with the black. So do we want to lighten that at all? And, I kind of actually want to. Let's just go ahead and take a little bit of the black point out. So there we go. That is just fixing that. And you know what? You can see it's a really subtle color issue, but that stuff makes a difference, right? So there's also a little bit of a saturation issue here as well, I think. We may want to actually saturate this a tiny bit more. So we could do a little bit of masking in this area, and you can kind of see that here. There's a little tiny saturation shift, but I don't think we're going to concern ourselves too much with that. Let's just maybe grab something like that. Q again. Command F to repeat the blur. That just repeats the last command. And then let's hit Q. Let's get rid of that, and let's just do a slight saturation adjustment there. And we're going to go into reds and just nudge up our saturation ever so slightly. Something like that. Okay, so with all those adjustments, this is sort of what we've done here. So the eye, I think, looks a lot better. And then zoomed out, again, I think, there's still a little bit of a saturation issue there. It still looks a little desaturated. So we can just do another masking and increase that saturation. Let's just try this whole area here. Very subtle sort of adjustment. So again, Command F, and I'm going to actually hit Command F a few times because I want to blur that a lot more. Q to get rid of quick mask, and I'm just going to do one final hue saturation adjustment in here. Again, going into reds, sample, and then let's increase our saturation. So somewhere around probably +6 is pretty good, maybe even a little bit more. Yeah, in and around there should be good. And of course, if you feel like it's a little too much, we can always lower down our opacity. So something like that. All right. Okay, I think that's blending pretty well. So let's just toggle that on and off again. And as you can see, we have done a fair bit of work just through adjustment layers. And you're probably thinking, well, that's a lot of work for one little shadow. And to be honest with you, it does go pretty quickly. I mean, we sort of tried to look at it detail by detail, but realistically speaking, something like that may take 1 or 2 minutes to fix once you get a little bit more proficient with knowing what needs to be done as far as the adjustments. So don't think of it as being a huge hassle. I know with frequency separation, you could probably do a few swipes there and it's gone. But, the beauty of this is that we can always go back on all of this stuff. We can take it off and it's just an adjustment layer, completely non-destructive. And so that is really the way you want to work. And generally speaking, if the makeup artist has done a good job, and you've done sort of a good job of lighting it, and you have a good model, then you're not going to be dealing with a ton of issues here. Now, obviously, there's some cases where the model may have, a lot of acne, a lot of skin imperfections, and of course, at that point, it's going to take much longer. But obviously, your rates will sort of, be according to that. You have to look at your image and sort of identify these areas that you think are going to be a lot of work to properly address. And, this really is the correct way to do it. So there's no real shortcuts to doing this that are both non-destructive and, preserve a lot of the texture. This is really the best way to go about it. So we've sorted out that area. The next area that we have to deal with, of course, is this area under the eye here. And so I'll be showing you how we do that next.